we've seen a lot of that inflation, I should point out, in healthcare costs, right? That's been one of the worst places. I mean, it's been everywhere. You get inflation right across the board. But one of Trump's purposes there, one of his goals, one of his desires, and you have only to look at the executive order he recently signed, is to lower the cost of healthcare, including drug costs. It is a passion of his, and believe me, when he's committed to something, he's all about getting that done. So the question is, how do you do that, right? How do you do it, especially in a world where you've got Big Pharma spending big money to try and gobble up as much market share as they possibly can? The president has a lot of decisions to make, and you got Big Pharma, big article in the Wall Street Journal today actually talking about this, really lobbying hard to make sure that smaller businesses don't have the leverage that we need them to have in order to negotiate on behalf of their employees, on behalf of their companies. And so they're trying to take out the PBMs as the guys in the middle. Before you say, the middlemen, they're taking all the money. Actually, the middlemen are the ones that are trying, you pay them to go out and negotiate a better price for you. And so the big pharma companies, they don't like this. I sat down moments ago with Brian Lanza from Mercury, who works with a lot of these PBMs to talk about it. By the way, I should just point out, Brian actually used to be on the Trump campaign. He was one of the senior people there. And whenever we needed anybody on the Trump campaign, I remember back in 2016, Brian always had good people for us. So I've known him for a while. Let's listen in. I sat down with him moments ago. Brian, my friend, it's really good to see you. It's been a while. Just so the viewer knows, Brian Lanza, he's at Mercury now, but he used to be the guy that would book all the guests on my program back at Fox in 2016 during the campaign. The good old days, right, Brian?
Yes, very much the good old days.
Well, I'm glad. What'd you say?
The golden age, as they say, right?
The golden age. Well, I think we got another golden age going on right now. I got to tell you, there's a lot of excitement in terms of all the policies and all the executive orders that are going through. And there's a lot of hope about the momentum that's underway. We saw, and I've told the viewers about this, how the president was signing an executive order most recently to bring down drug prices. And this has been, I know, a big focus of his, a passion of his, and you know a lot about this, so I figured it'd be good to have you on to kind of explain this. There's a goal to lower the cost of drugs, but I guess the question becomes, how does one do that when you have these big pharmaceuticals? And look, I get it, right? I'm a capitalist. I want them to make money. I want them to invest in research and development. I want them to come up with the best drugs to have the best health opportunities for Americans. But something's getting a little lost on the way to the forum because these things cost so much that a lot of people can't even afford them.
No, it has gotten lost. They've lost their purpose. I work with PBMs, and I'm proud to do it because oftentimes our customers are small businesses, people of 20 people or less who have to go before these huge corporations to try to negotiate, small prices. So what we've learned and what PBMs do is they pool together a bunch of other small businesses to try to leverage a better negotiation position. That's very much the free market. We're not faulting, pharmaceuticals for what they're doing, but the free market says that they get to have their own advocate on their behalf to try to negotiate, lower prices. And the best way to negotiate lower prices with anything related to drugs and healthcare is to pool people together, and that's what PBMs do. And so I'm not surprised that pharmaceuticals want to, shut down PBMs because we've been successful at defending and saving money for American consumers, small businesses. They have their goals, but our goals are different. Their goals is to maximize profits, and our goals is to maximize profits for our customers.
There's actually a big article in the Wall Street Journal about this exact topic today, and they're talking about how much money is being spent by the pharmaceutical industry to shut down the PBMs. And I'm like, whoa, wait a second. So just let's think this through. I'm a small company. I actually don't have a ton of employees that are getting health insurance or anything. But if I did, right, the last thing that I would have time for is trying to negotiate with the health insurance companies. The paperwork alone, I gotta tell you, Brian, it is a lot, right? It is a lot for any individual, let alone a small business owner trying to negotiate on behalf of one's employees. It just wouldn't happen. And I look at this and I'm like, okay, you're gonna take them out? It's a free country. We all are capitalists here. Last I checked, we ought to be able to ensure some kind of advocacy, right? For ourselves, for our employees, for our companies. And is that the role of the PBMs? And why on earth would we lose that?
Yeah, because we don't fit their corporate structure, right? At the end of the day, pharmaceutical companies, they have to, squeeze as much money they can out of their customers. And when they have somebody like us that are in the middle, sort of they refer to us as the middleman, saying, no, you're not going to be able to squeeze this small family business of 10 people. You're going to have to negotiate with a broader pool of, let's say, 10,000 people. You're hurting their profits. They very much, pharmaceuticals very much have the advantages over small businesses, and that's why PBMs exist. We're their advocates in this negotiating process to make sure that small businesses have the resources to expand, have the resources to do research and development, and make their products better. And pharmaceuticals see us as that impediment to their profits. So it's a push and pull. We're on the side of small businesses and customers who want to drive down their prices. Pharmaceuticals are there to do hocus pocus, to try to convince you that they're on your side. I think we've known over the last 30 years they're not. It took President Trump to open up Republican Party's eyes that these pharmaceuticals were companies were taking advantage of small businesses. You have to remember, for a long time, the Republican Party never questioned anything that pharmaceutical companies did. It was President Trump standing up and saying, no, this isn't right. This is actually affecting, my constituency, a lot of working class folks, a lot of small businesses, and we need to fight back. And we're happy to have President Trump on our side on containing the cost of prescription drugs. But that doesn't mean these pharmaceuticals are going to stop. They know what they need to do, and they're going to push. They're going to go to the maximum every time to squeeze their products, their profits off of us.
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly important for small businesses, without a doubt. But I was even thinking about it. I'm like, if you're a big business, even, if I'm Boeing, like, shouldn't I be focusing on the planes and making sure they're not falling out of the sky, as opposed to, trying to figure out how I'm going to negotiate on behalf of my employees with these giant pharmaceutical companies? It just seems like like, that's not their business, right? And that's like on a major scale with a huge company. But you think about these smaller companies, and it's not their business either. And so I think the advantage here at the PBM is you can outsource this, right? Outsource it to somebody else who specializes it. And then you get together with all the other small businesses, and suddenly you get some stature.
Oh my gosh, you have a tremendous amount of stature and leverage, right? It's
Yeah.
you are, in any negotiations, you're always benefited with the numbers that stand next to you, right? You have pharmaceuticals, they're standing behind thousands of employees, millions of dollars. On our side, we're standing with small businesses, not just one small business in the community, but most likely hundreds of small businesses in the community, and we're pulling our resources to make sure that we negotiate the best deal, for small businesses or customers.
What does the
Margins are
world
tight.
look like without that?
High cost. It's just completely unrestricted from the pharmaceuticals, from just driving up the cost. Now, we all know that they're going to say the right language when President Trump's here in Washington D.C. That they support smaller, they support lower prices, and they're going to do the things to get there. But at the end of the day, we also know that they have their responsibility is not the consumer. It's not the small businesses. That's Trump's responsibility, and that's our responsibility, and that's where we're happy to fight along with President Trump. They're going to do what they can. Pharmaceuticals do what they can, but we know we know what we need to do.
Yeah, no, I get it. I mean, and I know that there's a grassroots effort going on. You're part of it, and you work with a lot of these PBMs. Pharma windfall is where one needs to go if you want to learn more about this, and just how bad these pharmaceutical companies are, or if you want to become involved in this movement somehow. Because I think that, as much as people can do to kind of somehow engage in this process and make sure that your voice is heard with your representatives in Congress, your senators, et cetera, I think that goes a long way. And so it's about getting the word out, and consumers saying, you know what, we're not going to tolerate it anymore. Small business owners saying we're not going to tolerate it anymore, and we need, we need what we need, right, in order to survive and succeed. And it sounds like, and again, it's not that it sounds like, it's just the reality that you need somebody else doing that. Like, it's hard enough, right? As a mom of 3
Right.
kids, like managing insurance, let alone if you're running it for a small company.
Yeah, listen, we all need help in this process, and I need a mechanic to work on my car. I need a tax preparer to work on my taxes. I need a PBM to negotiate against these pharmaceutical companies, or it's not going to bode well for my business.
I hear you. Hey, Brian, it is so good to see you. Thank you so
It's a
much. We
pleasure.
appreciate your time today. Brian
Let's do it
Lanza.
again. Take care.
You bet. Good to see him. Anyway, pharmawindfall.com if you want more.